Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here is your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Sarah Vallely. She's a lead instructor and coach and founder of TSD Mindfulness Meditation Center. And she's been a meditation instructor or trainer for over the past 20 years. She's done this in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Asheville, North Carolina, and all over the world. Students from all over travel to attend her workshops and retreats. And they also practice online with her. She has written 4 books, including Sensational Meditation for Children, Tame, Soothe, Dwell. Okay. She has been certifying others to teach meditation and mindfulness since 2001. Her teaching style and content is highly acclaimed by yoga instructors, therapists, and healers. So thanks, Sarah, for being with us today, and let me know if anything I missed in your bio there.
Yeah, you probably didn't miss anything. I just need to add that I have a podcast called The Aware Mind, found on any podcast app. Mm-hmm.
Oh, very cool. I didn't know that. So I'll have to check that out myself. Yeah, so we're appreciative that you're here today. And as you're aware that most of my audience are female trauma survivors. And so we do like to ask your connection with our audience. Of course, you don't have to share anything that you're not open to sharing, but what about your history helps you relate to my audience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So personally, I've been through trauma as a child, and trauma it's a life work to recover from it, to learn from it, to grow and find safety and find peace in your life. And it's so good to reach out and find support. My trauma, I don't even know how to say it.
And you don't feel any pressure at all.
Yeah.
It's really okay. We're all in a different part of our journey. And we talked before the podcast started that sometimes in the coaching and therapy field, we get mixed messages on how much to share. So let's move along, because I don't want you to worry about what you're sharing or not sharing. But I think it's helpful for our audience to know that you have a personal understanding of maybe some of the things that they are going through now or in the past. So what led you to being in the field that you're in? What was the calling or the interest or passion? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I've been around meditation since a child. My parents were both meditators. I was going to ashrams when I was as young as 2 years old, and just around all of these different kinds of spiritualities and practices. And I began my own meditation training when I was about 25. And I also was a school teacher, and I ended up teaching children how to meditate. And then I ended up teaching adults, parents, teachers, therapists, how to teach meditation to children. So that's how my career got launched. My first 2 books are on that subject. And so about 5 years ago, I switched gears, and now I'm primarily focusing on teaching adults how to teach other adults mindfulness, and also teaching adults, coaches and therapists, how to incorporate mindfulness strategies into their sessions. And I'm also a mindfulness coach, working one-on-one with people who are in crisis, have past trauma, experiencing grief, and just overall stress, work stress, relationship stress, things of that nature.
Awesome. Why mindfulness for trauma survivors? Why would that be a healing practice for them?
Yeah. So what I've found, what happens for those of us who've been through trauma, is there's different parts of our psychological emotional system that get activated because of the past trauma. And what I talk about a lot is the mind, our thoughts as being one of these aspects, another being our nervous system, particularly our fight or flight responses. And then the third I refer to as the heart, which would be our deep emotions and where a lot of our trauma is held. And what happens is because of the past trauma, we start using our thoughts, our planning, our projection, our analytical skills, all of these to kind of make up for the past trauma and to protect us. If we can think our way through this, if we can plan our way through this, and this might be unconscious, but on some level what we're doing is we're avoiding any further trauma. We're really trying to plan and execute everything in a certain way to avoid further trauma. That's why a lot of us who are trauma survivors, we're, these A-type personalities, we're very driven, we're very successful. But what happens eventually, people get to a point where it's burnout. It's just too much. And so that's one aspect, is helping people when they get to that point to quiet their mind a little bit, soothe all that thinking, help with that rumination, that worry, that planning. And then another is people who are also being affected by the nervous system, those fight or flight responses. We all go into fight or flight, but those of us who might be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, we have trouble getting out of the fight or flight. We get stuck there in that fight, flight, freeze mode. And mindfulness really helps to become mindful of that process that's happening. I help my clients be aware that they are in fight, flight, or freeze. And then there's some techniques to help soothe that experience. And eventually we retrain our nervous system. And then the last piece there, the heart, those deep emotions, the abandonment, grief, rejection, betrayal, all of those emotions that are really tied to the trauma, that we're getting these re-triggered over time. Being mindful of that process, being mindful that we're going into trauma triggers. And then I teach a self-compassion practice. And that's huge for people who have gone through trauma. What happens a lot is we just turn on ourselves and the shame, I'm sure you know all about that. And so the self-compassion will really help ease us through that and switch some of that thinking and that discomfort around.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I'm a huge advocate for working on self-compassion. I love Dr. Kristen Neff's work.
Oh yeah.
Self-compassion.
She's my babe.
yeah. I love her work.
Yeah.
So I don't know how often you get this question, but in my therapy practice, in my coaching practice, I often get the question, what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, mindfulness is the big umbrella.
Right. And under that umbrella are two major pieces here. And one is meditation, a sitting practice. So we can sit and meditate, and we can do single pointed focus, which is noticing your breath or noticing the sounds in your environment or noticing physical sensations, or open awareness, where we're just noticing whatever comes up into our consciousness. So that's the sitting practice. And I cover the sitting practice in my classes, but in coaching, we do 5-minute exercises. And so the other piece under that umbrella is mindfulness mindset. And that's just during the day, switching the way we operate, being more mindful to help us ease through the emotions. For example, being aware of how we feel in our body when we're experiencing intense emotion. Are we feeling it in our chest? Are we feeling it in our gut? Where is that affecting us? That would be a typical mindfulness mindset approach. And also being aware of these repetitive thought cycles. If you're someone that ruminates a lot, just during the day, noticing, okay, yep, that went down a rumination hole there for a while, but I've noticed that. I'm using my mindfulness, and you can name it. Oh, that's rumination. That can help you separate from that. So that would be examples of that mindfulness mindset, that other piece.
Okay. I often tell my clients that mindfulness seems easier to me than meditation. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by meditation. So you're saying practicing mindfulness meditation is easier than some other meditations you've practiced?
Yeah, maybe mindfulness activities, like doing something mindfully, like that raisin exercise or brushing one tooth at a time or meditative walking, having something to do where, you know, the stereotypical meditation practices, you're sitting in a hot room for an hour with your legs crossed, trying to not think.
Yeah.
You know, that's the myth of it, right? And so when my clients have that kind of as in their head is, I can't do any of those, it's too hard, I can't sit still, I introduce them to meditation by doing small mindfulness exercises. So that's what I think it, like, do you have a different approach to that?
Yeah, no, I'm right in line with you. And, you know, your original question about, you know, is that easier? Is incorporating some of those exercises during the day easier? Yeah, I think on some level it is. And one of the reasons is I think people find a bigger advantage quicker. Like the feedback is just so quick and fast, and the benefits. You just do that 5-minute exercise during the day and you're like, whoa, I feel so much better. So on that level, but when you're doing your sitting practice, you know, you have to make sure you know where you're going to sit. You need to know what time you're going to sit, how long you're going to sit. And so there are some challenges with the sitting practice. Although I will say that if you do get to a point, you know, for the listeners who are sitting for, you know, 15, 20 minutes a day, there's lots of advantages to that too. But I'm a huge fan of incorporating these mindfulness exercises during the day. My philosophy is if you do the right exercise at the right time, you see huge shifts.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the optimal time to do a sitting practice? Or is there one?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people like to do it in the morning because that's when their mind is more quiet. But, you know, maybe at night or during the day when your mind is more active is actually a better time to meditate. So yeah, no, I don't really say there's a good time. I guess a good time is just whatever works for you. I am really a fan of routine. And, you know, if you can make it a routine, even if it's just 5 minutes, just incorporating it into your routine in some way can be really helpful.
I really love that you use the word routine, because I think research shows that people who have routines tend to be more successful. And of course, you mentioned the type A survivor, right? Survivors tend, if we do spectrums, there's people on the type A end, and then there's people that are really struggling to function, right? And of course, there's lots of people in between those two extremes. Now, where was I going with this question, do you think? Oh, yeah, go back to the routines.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had too much coffee, maybe. So with routines being huge in terms of just the structure of the day is super helpful for people, whether you're scattered or not, because it helps you just frame the day, especially that morning. I call them bookends, actually. Mm-hmm. The morning routine and the bedtime routine are your bookends for your day. Mm-hmm. Do you have can you walk us through, if you have one of those routines or both of them, can you walk us through what yours look like, since you are a dedicated practitioner to mindfulness?
Yeah.
And you have this
well, I love long meditation. So when I meditate, I'll meditate for 90 minutes, which is not normal. So yeah, I you know, I've been to a lot of retreats, and, you know, those long meditations are really good for some people. So what the routine that I like is, it's actually usually Saturday mornings. And I like to make sure that every Saturday morning I can get in one of those long meditations. And then, yeah, I think, you know, I could say that meditation is part of my nighttime routine too. I will, before going to sleep, and almost, you know, right before, I will spend 15 minutes going through a certain process that I do that has to do with, you know, the TSD and TSD mindfulness is tame the mind, soothe the gut, and dwell on the heart. So the idea is that it's really hard to move into the heart space when our mind is jumpy, and it's really hard to move into the heart space when our nervous system is activated, when we're in some fight or flight. So I do a process before I go to bed where I check in with my mental attention, you know, how busy is that? I might do some techniques to kind of quiet that down. I'll check in with my fight or flight responses, my gut, am I triggered in any way? I'll do some soothing for that, and then move into the heart. And then that's where the self-compassion is. And so, if there's something coming up that evening where maybe I'm feeling a little rejected by something that happened or something, I can tell myself, even though I had these feelings of rejection today, I'm loved. Even though I had these feelings of rejection today, I'm worthy of that love. Even though I had these feelings, I'm connected. That this feeling of rejection in no way separates me from the rest of humanity. In fact, it connects me even more, and things like that. So yeah, that's nice.
I love that. I love that routine.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's tame, soothe, and what was the D again? Dwell.
Dwell.
Okay. And that's the heart one.
Dwell in the heart. Yeah. Yeah. And as far as trauma, what I believe is our trauma really ends up in that heart space, because trauma is illogical. You can never rationalize trauma, and our headspace, our minds wants everything to be rational. So a lot of things that end up in our headspace are logical. If this, then that. And trauma, you really can't fit into that. And if you do fit trauma into a logical sequence, it's going to be wrong. And that's where we take on some of this faulty thinking, is because we're trying to rationalize our own trauma. So the trauma does end up in the heart area. So that's why that self-compassion practice and getting there and dwelling there and being there with your trauma and loving yourself with your trauma, accepting yourself with that trauma. And that's what leads to healing.
Beautifully said. My next question, I know you said you listened to a couple of my podcasts. I'm a huge book nerd. I'm a huge believer in bibliotherapy, like using books as part of the healing process. Books and travel, actually. I think travel should be part of the healing process as well. Do you have favorite books about mindfulness, like especially for the beginning person who wants to see how mindfulness can be helpful in their healing? So I obviously know having an instructor and go through things is the best. But let's say you have zero money and you can go to the library. What book would you recommend?
Yeah. There's a book that Dan Harris wrote. He is a newscaster. He was on one of the major networks. I think he might do Nightline. And he wrote a book called 10% Happier. And so if you don't mind a little humor and some kind of crass kind of personality, I love him. He's pretty hilarious. That is an amazing book about mindfulness. There's probably only maybe about 50% of it is about mindfulness. The other 50%, a lot of it's about his career. But the way basically what he does is he tells his story of how he came to practice mindfulness. And he was doing drugs. He had a high-powered job. He was kind of in a mess. And so it's his story of how he, talking to one person that led to another person, he finally got into some mindfulness training. And then it's his story about how he started to wake up to his own consciousness. And he explains it so well. And so that's a really good one, 10% Happier. If you've got a little background already in mindfulness, there's a book called The Experience of Insight by Joseph Goldstein. So that's The Experience of Insight by Joseph Goldstein. And so that's very, very instructional. And that's actually a retreat, basically the transcript, but it's written like a book. It's nice, of a 30-day retreat, all the Dharma talks that he gave during a retreat. And so that's a really good if you want to understand the Buddhist philosophy behind mindfulness. So those are a couple good ones. And then Kristen Neff, I recommend her book, Self-Compassion, to all my clients. That's key. That got me through. I can to share a little bit about what happened the last year. COVID was going on. And so that was that. I was broken up with a relationship because I voted for the wrong candidate during the election a year and a half ago. So that was very traumatic. And then I got in a snowboarding accident and got a traumatic brain injury. And then my daughter had a huge falling, lots of difficulty, and she ended up moving out. And that whole episode, that 6-month episode, was just so much trauma. And her book saved me. I listened to an audiobook. I had the brain injury. I couldn't read books yet, but I listened to her book 2 or 3 times, and I just did what she said, and that got me out of it. Because you get into these places where you just start beating myself up, over my daughter. You just feel like, oh, I was such a horrible mother. And then, oh, I've gotten a snowboarding accident. I'm so irresponsible. I couldn't work for 5 months. How could I let all these people down? I mean, you just start going down that road, and her self-compassion practice just really changed my life.
Oh, that's so touching. And I loved how you said that you listened to it 2 or 3 times, because that's exactly what I prescribe. Is there's so many gems of wisdom and kindness. I do recommend listening to it 2 to 3 times. And I also actually recommend the audiobook over the physical book, because one of my clients who had a lot of physical pain and had limited mobility, he said it was the first time in his life and he wore headphones when he was listening to it. It was the first time in his life that someone was whispering kind things in his ears. And it just stuck with me. So I really work hard on trying to get my male clients to listen to it too, because they sort of reject, stereotypically, of course, reject self-help. So I'm like, no, I had this man once, and this is what and so I've had a few men listen to it as well. But yeah, I love giving yourself a hug. That's something I taught my kids really early. Like if they were missing mom, like if I was driving off to work, we did this thing where they would be in the window, they would blow a kiss, wave, and then hug themselves, and it just helped them feel more secure.
Yeah. And the validation piece is, I think, excuse me, so important. Just taking the time, taking a moment, taking a pause to say, it's understandable that you're sad about this. Like this is really hard to go through, to have a friend move away or whatever it is. And that can just switch so many things. If you can just stop, pause, give yourself validation for the space, the emotion that you're in, because generally what's happening is we're doing the opposite. Generally, we're saying something to ourselves that's invalidating our whole response. And that doesn't make any sense. If we are invalidating our emotions, we're basically telling ourselves that our psychological emotional system is broken, like there's something wrong with us. If we're having a true emotion like loss or pain, something like that, there's a reason for it. And we can validate ourselves. And I think it's great for stress too. If you're feeling anxious, the other day I was in line at Walgreens to get a COVID test. And I realized that because it was taking so long, I might be late for a Zoom. And so I had all this anxiety come up, and I just said to myself, it's understandable that you're feeling really stressed right now. You might be late for your Zoom. And that just it's like 80% decrease in anxiety. It's just doing that. I did a whole podcast. My last episode is just all on validation. I'm just a huge fan. It works so well. And I don't think people talk about it enough.
I agree. Yeah. Because I think it's interesting, like how we are so unkind to ourselves. Like we are our own worst bully. We don't even need to be bullied by anyone else. We bully ourselves so well. And it limits, it gives us limiting beliefs about our abilities and our potential. So validating emotions is huge. Yeah. And encouraging ourselves.
Yeah. And I can tell when people are doing this through the assessments that I give. So I give a 15 question assessment that's for free during my free consultation. And during that assessment, I can tell, where people are caught up. Are they caught up in really the thinking part? Is that really getting them stuck? Are they in a lot of fight or flight triggers? Is the past trauma coming up? And I have these 7 different unique stress types. And then I can let people know what their unique stress type is. And based on that stress type, then I know exactly which mindfulness exercises are going to work best for them. And then I have a longer assessment if I start working with them in a client relationship. And then I can tell even more which tools to use, because I have about 60 mindfulness tools.
Oh, wow.
And so I can narrow it down. It's like, okay, this is exactly what's happening with this person. So it's very efficient. It's fast.
Very cool. And I see that one of the gifts you have for our audience today, should they want to explore working with you further, you do offer a 20-minute consultation. Is that primarily that task that you're talking about? That's what happens during that time?
Yeah. So people can either go to my website and scroll down at the bottom of my homepage and I actually have the test there. They can just do it online, or I'll give it to people over the phone. It's just 15 questions. It doesn't take very long. But yeah, that's totally no charge. And then I can give them feedback as far as, which part of their system is exasperating their stress. Like we all have these stressful things going on, but different people have different things going on within themselves that's intensifying it. So you can think of two different people going through the same experience, and one person goes through it and they're like, oh, it's not too bad. And the other person goes through the same exact experience and with a lot of overwhelm, a lot of stress. And so that's because of these certain mechanisms that are going on within our emotional psychological system that we can really address with mindfulness. Yeah. Super helpful.
Yeah. Oh, what was my other question? Oh, yeah. So I will have the website in our show notes, but can you let people know how to find you online?
Yeah, it's my name, sarahvallely.com. So SARAH, V as in Victor, ALLELY.com.
Okay. And are all your books on your website, Amazon, everywhere? Where would they find your books?
You can find them on my website. My first 3 books are on Amazon. My last book, I just sell off my website now. I got into it with Amazon. So I don't know if I'm going to put any more books on Amazon, but yeah, the last one, you can get all of them on my website. And then my podcast, The Aware Mind, you can find it on any podcast app. Some of the episodes we've done recently are using mindfulness to address fear and worry, using mindfulness to address procrastination, strategies for using self-compassion, like we've been talking about, to address self-critical thinking, being overworked and overwhelmed. Those are some of our topics.
Oh, they're perfect for both survivors and non-survivors, right? Those impact a lot of people. Well, I am thrilled that you are here with us today. If you have last words of wisdom of people feeling stuck right now, they're listening to this and they wish they were further along in their healing than they might be right now. Do you have any words of wisdom about that?
Yeah, I mean, I could offer a couple exercises. If they find themselves in rumination is when we relive a past event. We start analyzing it, nitpicking it apart, nitpicking ourselves apart, is to do something called the practice of noting. And that is naming the episode, naming the experience, naming the type of thought. So you might even name it rumination. You might name it being self-critical, whatever it is, and you name it. And the idea is that if you can get to a place in your mind where you're actually naming the thought cycle, that you've put enough space in between you and the thought cycle that you can kind of take a step back and just more watch it as if it's a movie and then let it kind of dissipate and go away. So that can be really helpful. And, being aware if you are in fight or flight and helping yourself, removing yourself for 5 minutes and giving yourself, saying some affirmations around safety, around stability. Think about someone in your life that brings you stability to really start soothing and helping yourself out of that fight or flight response.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. All right, Sarah, thank you so much for being here and sharing your practices with us and your time. And I hope people who would like to learn more about meditation or mindfulness reach out to you. I know I will, so I'll commit to that. And I also wanted to mention, we didn't mention this yet, is that Sarah does offer 60-minute coaching sessions, and she has a 6-class mindfulness training package, if that is something you think would be helpful to you. All right, thanks everyone for being here today.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.